In the woods, my dog discovered a wounded extraterrestrial vampire woman who was the queen of a galaxy. Just as Ryan was clinging to the leash, Thor barked at a squirrel with the zeal of a lumberjack on a caffeine high. Suddenly, the dog leapt into the underbrush as if he had suddenly remembered that he had left the oven on in 1987. Thor, you terrible betrayer. You have 4 legs. Ryan swooped into the forest behind him, crashing through brambles and nearly tripping over a rock that appeared suspiciously like it had been judging. Since the Jurassic period, he had wanted nothing to do with nighttime forest hikes. He thought they were reserved for serial killers, lost tourists, and cryptids with bad decision-making abilities. However, Thor had insisted on going anyway, and Ryan hadn't entirely lost it, but his combination of whining and head-tilting made him feel like the worst pet parent ever. If he had said no, a branch had smacked him on the shin, and he was bleeding profusely. At this point, his entire body was likely just one big O. Finally, Thor let out a bark, but it wasn't his usual bark. As he pursued the squirrels or neighborhood raccoons, Ryan heard a sharp, frantic bark, as if he had cornered something he didn't fully understand, or perhaps something was cornering him. Ryan froze his breath, coming in hot clouds. The forest felt thicker, as if the trees were leaning into eavesdropping. He followed the sound, pushing past a curtain of moss, half expecting to find a bear, or worse, a naked yoga cult. Instead, he discovered Thor standing motionless next to a crumpled figure under a tangle of cedar roots. The woman appeared to be a tall, sturdy woman. Her hood was partially pulled down, exposing silver hair that curled like smoke. Her skin was too pale, her features too sharp, and her ears, which were long and graceful, stood like crescent blades. Ryan opened his mouth to say something heroic, or helpful, or maybe just coherent. The woman, who seemed impossibly still, wore tattered black fabric that shimmered under the moonlight, like silk soaked in oil. Her eyes, which were silver reflective and looked more like 2 tiny galaxies tucked into her skull, were opened. She spoke softly, but with a strong undertone. Hi, did you fall? Are you okay? I'm dying." Ryan blinked, thinking, okay, that's direct. Most people start with, "I need help," or "call an ambulance." But sure, let's start big. She attempted to move, but Thor writhed and nudged her arm with his snout, so she murmured and reached out to stroke his fur, her fingers trembling. Thor could feel me even through the field animals. Ryan crouched beside her, still not sure if he was experiencing a dream, a hallucination, or a very real nightmare. "I don't know who you are, lady, but you're bleeding a lot. This is Oregon, so the ER is like 15 minutes away. I am Valera." She interrupted, pushing herself up with surprising speed, and he stared at her ears, blood-metallic scent, and strange static tingling in his fingertips. This wasn't a wild forest hermit or a cosplay, but something else entirely. There was a moment of silence as Ryan broke the silence. "Hey, I'm Ryan. I drive a Honda and work in tech support. I once cried watching Wall-E, so now that we're sharing," she said with a weak, amused laugh. "Are you making fun of me?" he asked with a stutter. "Okay, cool. My name is Ryan. I was betrayed, hunted, and extremely tired." "No, I'm just waiting for Himari. That's like a vampire, isn't it?" "Are you a vampire?" she said with a twist of her head. "Do you primarily use plant matter as fuel? I've been overindulging in carbs and pizza lately, and I've had a lot of regrets. So according to your logic, I am a vampire. Oh, wonderful forest vampires. I should have stayed home and watched space documentaries like a normal person instead of venturing out tonight." Her fingers were icy, and her eyes burned. She leant forward, clutching his jacket, and suddenly realized that someone was tracking her. I escaped through the event horizon of a minor gravity, But now my ship is lost, and Ryan blinked twice in confusion, as if trying to clarify something. "I'm from space," she snapped, swaying and slumping against him once more. "They will finish me soon," she said, her voice fading. "If they find me before I recover, they will glass this entire quadrant and burn it clean." None of the witnesses, not even the ants, were able to prevent this. Ryan glanced at Thor, who gave a half-hearted wag, like, "Don't look," as if to convey the gravity of the situation. Ryan asked why she trusted him, and she looked up at him with those unfathomable eyes. After a while, she collapsed into his arms, and he found himself holding an extraterrestrial vampire queen, all the while his dog playfully licked her face as if she were a new chew toy. Up above the stars seemed to be watching something, and Ryan muttered to himself, "Okay, you've officially lost it." He was hugging extraterrestrial royalty after all, and he had been speaking to forest vampires. The forest remained silent, but Valera awoke with a piercing scream. Not the kind that shattered windows or roused worried neighbors, but a tight, choked sound that seemed more felt than heard, as if space were ripping at the boundaries of reality. And she vowed that someone with the name Admiral Deathniffe would vaporize her. Thor barked once, tail wagging, and Ryan sighed. "Fine, we'll take her home, but we won't be responsible if she devours my neighbor." As Thor barked like he had just seen a mailman from Mars, Ryan's coffee mug fell to the floor. Thor's eyes widened and glowed a faint, silvery, sharp light. For an instant, Ryan thought she was going to vaporize his living room. Thor, meanwhile, scanned the room like a predator, trying to decide which object to throw through the wall. Her breathing was ragged, and then without warning she snatched a throw pillow, threw it at his lava lamp. The ball bounced harmlessly, but she continued asking, "Feel better?" Ryan asked from what he hoped was a safe distance behind the kitchen island. She blinked somewhat. "That's good. I'm glad we're using soft furnishings for our interstellar tantrums." She looked down at the pillow as if she hadn't noticed she'd tossed it. "My apologies. The dream memory loop was corrupted. I saw my sister before the betrayal, and her eyes were kind." Ryan nodded as if he completely understood. "Yeah, I also have dreams that turn into space soap operas, usually after eating too much pizza." She didn't smile, and she stared at the couch cushion as if it had insulted her lineage. "This house is your royal chamber." He nearly choked on his cereal, though. "This number, here we have my living room, complete with a futon. That shelf over there is actually a DVD tower, and that snow globe you thought was a galactic mine. Crystal is actually just a snow globe." Valera cocked her head and asked, "Where do you perform your rituals? I mean, my usual morning ritual order is showering, coffee, and panic." As she stood there, swaying ever so slightly, she surveyed the room once more, her long ears twitching in a primitive but endearing way. The popcorn ceiling was a defensive measure, but it was a poor decision made in the 80s like parachute pants. Thor walked over and dropped a tennis ball at Valera's feet, who stared, looked at it as if it were going to explode, wagging his tail in anticipation. "He wants to test me," she whispered. Ryan watched as she took the ball, examined it as if it were a tiny nuclear core, and threw it with such power that it shattered the window, ricocheted off a neighbor's bird feeder, and disappeared into the trees with a noise that could only be described as humph. Thor looked delighted, but Ryan wasn't so thrilled. The window was a custom double-pane energy efficient. "I have closed the wound internally," she said, deadpan, "but the solarite residue lingers and burns slowly." He sighed and started picking glass off the carpet. Valra sat again, folding herself in a manner that seemed too elegant for a being who just launched a tennis ball into orbit. She winced as her hand touched her side. He hurried over with the first aid kit, or whatever the technical term is. I need time to regenerate, and solarite is just a normal thing to have in a suburban forest. I don't know what you're upset about, but... She remained silent, her pale face making her unnatural skin tone look ghostly. Ryan took out the kit and began awkwardly applying more gauze. I know this isn't exactly Imperial Medbay, but I watched an entire season of emergency vets, so I figure I'm at least 50% qualified. She glanced down at his hands, and then at the roll of gauze. You're shaking in his hands, and I'm sitting here bandaging an extraterrestrial vampire queen who eats peanut butter spoonfuls and smashes my windows while playing fetch. Of course I'm trembling, she whispered, her lips twitching to the closest thing to a smile she'd shown since waking up. I owe you. You've risked so much for Earthman Ryan. Yeah, I'm racking up karma points I can't even spend. Extracting an object from the folds of her cloak, she produced a small metallic object resembling a coin. The symbols on the object changed as he attempted to focus on them. She explained that the object was a blood oath token, and she placed it in Ryan's palm to bind favor. If I were to die, you would be able to claim vengeance on my behalf. Ryan gazed at the token, wondering why she hadn't simply written a heartfelt thank you card. Was the object intended to be a cosmic frequent flyer card? Ryan hoped that it wasn't related to the last man who tried to sell it. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door, and they both froze. Ryan whispered, I wasn't involved. In response to the question of whether to hide or offer snacks, Valra stood up and took charge of the situation. Ryan blinked. You're still half dead? I'm mostly not, before he could protest. Two life forms emerged, one with erratic biochemistry, likely caused by synthetic augmentation. Valra raised a hand to show her lack of a scanner, and a tiny beam of light shot from her ring, seemingly passing through the wall. She sighed in frustration. With a fluid grace befitting a multidimensional diplomat, Valera reached for the doorknob and opened it. Two men stood there resembling off-brand government agents. One wore a skin-tight suit and dark spectacles, while the other chewed gum as if it owed him money. Hello, the first man said. We're with the Bureau of Atmospheric Phenomena. Would you mind if we ask you a few questions? Valera's smile was anything but friendly. Of course, she replied. But first, would you care for some tea? Ryan observed from a distance. Ryan nervously nodded. It's not tea. Valera elegantly placed the cups on the table, making Ryan nervous. The two agents accepted them without blinking. The man in the too-tight suit gave a quick nod, and the gum chewer looked at his drink as if it were trying to flirt with him. Ryan watched from the kitchen, arms folded, and whispered to Thor, Tell me again why I haven't run. Valera sat across from the agents, poised and calm, as if she weren't leaking starlight out of a wound in her side, and hiding a centuries-old blood vendetta behind her impeccable posture. Thor licked his paw and looked unimpressed. I'm the type of guy who invites vampire queens into my house and lets them serve dimensional black ops their own doom, he said with a smug expression. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? Vra asked, her voice trailing off as she sipped her tea. You're mistaken. I've been here enjoying the local customs. This man Ryan was kind enough to introduce me to cheese in a can and something called reality television. It was a truly harrowing cultural experience. Ryan coughed, but we also watched Interstellar. She sobbed at the bookshelf. She said, It's not because of Matthew McConaughey. The gum chewer narrowed his eyes and asked, Are you from around here? Valera slowly turned her head, which revealed her accent. Ryan cut in, saying, I'm in a very dedicated LP group. We're working on a short film, real indie stuff. The suit leant forward, and they weren't trying to disrupt your live-action soap opera, Mr. Tech Support. But what landed in those? I'm just the guy with the couch and the Wi-Fi. If anything extraterrestrial landed out there, it probably took one look at Oregon and decided to head for Los Angeles. The room was too quiet, and the 3 satellites lost power for exactly 47 seconds. The moment it happened, Valera smiled slightly. Maybe your satellites need better shielding. Or maybe you're hiding a fugitive. Gum Chewer snapped. Ryan mumbled something. Both agents turned to him. He threw up his hands in the air. Thor, as usual, ceased licking the rug to alleviate tension. Suddenly, the suit's wrist began blinking red, causing him to frown, tap it, and turn pale. "We need to go," he said, his voice tinged with anger. "What is it?" Valor stood up, her expression darkening as she reached into her cloak and pulled out a thin, shimmering rod with a... The flick grew into a full staff that sounded like an enraged lightsaber. "Ryan, I just had the carpet cleaned." Vera's voice lowered and she said, "You'll want to leave now that you're both here." The suit hesitated, and then he nodded. "You're not the threat we were looking for, are you?" she asked. "But they're gum chewers," he scoffed. "We don't run from spooks." Suddenly the house resounded like a sharp pulse, not a sound, just pressure shattered every glass in the cabinet. The power went out, and Ryan's the microwave let out a series of binary screams before finally dying. As the agents obeyed Ryan, who had been holding a banana tightly, they made their way to the front lawn. Above them, the sky rippled like oil on water, and a shape materialized from the clouds. There were no engines or lights, just a jarring geometry that hurt the eyes. Ryan pointed out, "That thing is definitely not from NASA." Valera stepped out onto the lawn, her cloak catching in the sudden wind. She spun her staff, driving it into the grass. Light lines emanated from it, tracing a glowing circle with symbols that appeared to belong on an ancient artifact. Ryan approached her and said, "Are you doing magic now?" As if she were a monolith or even a really vivid party poster. "Is this a shield or a weapon? Your species hasn't caught up yet." "Science," she added. "It's a request," she said, her voice carrying a hint of surprise. Suddenly, a shimmering object descended from the sky, revealing a long metallic shape that pulsed red light. Its impact was as soft as a dropped piano, causing the dirt to crack under its weight. Unfurled from the shape was a mechanical 7-foot-tall insectile that hummed with energy. It glanced at Valera, who glanced back, and then it disappeared. Ryan whispered, "Valra of Andros, you are far from your throne. I no longer need a throne." Valra then lifted her staff and said, "I have a couch." The mech advanced, killing the grass beneath it in an instant. Valra then raised her hand, the blood oath token pulsing in Ryan's pocket. He swore he felt his teeth vibrate, and he wondered if she was returning anything. Ryan suggested that Valra take her threats to Yelp, but ultimately they were all doomed. During today's events, a mech raised a cannon arm. Valra then maneuvered the light from her staff in such a way that it bent and twisted a beam upward, striking the cannon just in time to prevent it from firing. As a result, the mech staggered, the grass exploded. Thor dashed in circles, barking, as if it were the squirrel apocalypse. Ryan, in a perfectly normal Thursday move, dove behind the mailbox. Amidst all that mayhem, she glanced at him and said, "Get in the car." "We're escaping in a Honda Civic," he blinked, "and I'm grinning from ear to ear." She nodded, and he grinned, finally a mission befitting this machine. A few seconds later, the Civic exploded, Valera clutching the staff in her lap, and Ryan clenching his fists behind the wheel. The explosion melted the lawn into glass and knocked out 3 more satellites. The agents vanished, leaving Ryan panting. "I think I may have just lost my deposit," Ryan thought. "All right, But I don't own the house, am I? Valor adjusted her cloak, and then lowered her voice, explaining that she didn't own the house. Nope, she said. Her voice quieted. So what you really lost, is she saying you're in the war? Now, he looked at her, then at Thor, and finally at the road stretching into darkness. Could we stop for tacos? She glanced at him, and he swore for a second. Then she smiled, and Ryan realized that the universe had a petty sense of humor. The taco place was closed due to unforeseen circumstances, which meant that someone had probably spilt salsa into a fusion reactor, or even got Ryan, who was abducted while eating a burrito, muttered under his breath, "Unforeseen. Oh, I foresaw this. This is the kind of day that ends in a taco betrayal." Valera stood silently by his side, her long ears twitching as she scanned the parking lot as if it might suddenly explode into a battle between rival food trucks. Thor peed on a planter as a protest. "We could try the gas station," Ryan suggested once a week. "They have those hot dogs that spin forever, practically a religious experience." "They won't wait long," Velra finally said, her silver eyes fixed on the sky. "Not after that display. Dietz, are you referring to the exploding mech or the light show that caused my mailbox to cease to exist in 4 dimensions? Either way, Ryan ran a hand through his hair, which was disappointing because I was hoping my week would be filled with intergalactic manhunts and becoming an accessory to cosmic Riocide. Vera's gaze shifted to Ryan, and she said, "You don't need to stay with me, Ryan, lady. My house is a crater. My couch is probably smoldering in the neighbor's yard, and I'm driving around with a vampire queen, a glowing murderer. Stick and a dog that now barks at satellites. I think I've crossed the threshold." She studied him for a moment before, to Ryan's eternal surprise, said, "Good." They returned to the Civic, which was now in Ryan's eyes the most important ship in the galaxy. The back seat had a faint fry scent, and Valera, who saw the passenger seat as a throne, sat on it with an air of royalty. Thor curled up and snored like nothing could wake him up unless it involved squirrels or doomsday. How? As they got on the interstate, Ryan wanted to know whether they were heading anywhere in particular, or if they were simply going to drive until they found the next closed fast food joint. "Ryan, there's this relay that was left behind when your planet was mostly ocean and dinosaurs. If any of your allies are still alive, I can use it to contact them. You have a space pager buried in the woods, encoded into the mantle hidden beneath layers of tectonic misdirection. Not even your deepest drills have been able to reach it, and the only way to access it is through Denny's." Ryan blinked. They drove in silence for a few minutes before Ryan whispered, "Of course it's a Denny's." Upon arrival, it appeared to be just another roadside Denny's with fluorescent lights buzzing, and a lone truck parked out front. The smell of old grease was strong enough to register on a gear counter, and Valera led the way inside her presence, confusing the 2 waitresses and the short-order cook, who evidently hadn't blinked since 1993, sat in a booth with peeling vinyl records and a view of a jukebox that hadn't "Are you planning to place an order?" asked the laminated menu, which has been in use since Reagan's administration. "Are we going to sit here until the Grand Slam melts the time barrier?" Ryan inquired. "Or are we going to do something else?" Valera slid her staff under the table, pressed her palm against its surface, and whispered something that caused the lights to flicker. A dull chime rang from below, and Ryan gawked. "Did you just hack a table? Your furniture is less secure than your satellite," she said, and she felt insulted that Ryan had insulted both my government and this establishment in a single sentence. Finally, a hidden hatch popped open. Ryan peered into the hole beneath the table and saw that it led into darkness. Thor silently followed OA-compliant Vira, as if it were nothing out of the ordinary. Ryan glanced over at the waitress, who seemed oblivious as she watched a soap opera on her phone and mumbled, "Well, if I die in Denny's basement, tell the tabloids I died as a result of my life's poor choices." The tunnel was icy, not merely frigid, but with an odor of ozone and long-lost civilizations. Ryan felt the chill as they slid down a series of stone metal and shimmering surfaces that changed color depending on his blinking. Then, like an eye's iris, the relay chamber opened its gentle pulse, echoing through his body. Valera advanced, placed her hand on a disk of liquid light, and spoke in a language that made Ryan's nose run. The relay flickered, but she tried again this time, with a softer, more desperate voice. "No one's answering, are they?" Ryan observed, as her shoulders drooped as the light from the relay faded. "Okay, look, I know you're all warrior queen of the cosmos and everything, but you're not alone in this. I mean, I'm not much, but I have a car, some duct tape, a dog with excellent intuition, and an ex-girlfriend who still owes me her Netflix password." "That's a start, right?" she asked quietly. He cautiously approached her, taking care not to step on anything that could dissolve his shoes. "Okay, look, I've got a car, some duct tape, and a dog with excellent intuition. You're not alone, right?" Valere looked at him with a serious expression. In the blink of an eye, the relay went off 7 times, and her pupils dilated as she heard a jumbled ancient voice echoing through the room. The Queen's coordinates were received, and the extraction protocol was started. Velra let out a breath, and Ryan grinned, thinking, "Great friends with spaceships. Can they bring tacos?" However, the room shook, and the iris at the top of the structure started to close, not because of them, but because of something else, something heavy, something buzzing that had entered the building. "Valera, they found us again." Ryan groaned. "I swear, if this ends in another blown-up parking lot, I'm switching to Uber." The secret alien relay chamber wasn't supposed to have elevator music, but as the ground vibrated and warning glyphs pulsed along the walls, a strange, overly cheerful jingle began to play, as if someone had linked the apocalypse to a discount hold. Ryan looked up at the ceiling speakers blinking, wondering if we had been put on hold by the authorities. Valera didn't answer, but she was already moving her staff sparking with red energy as she circled the glowing relay. Ryan had spent enough time with her to notice the slight twitch in her jaw, that signaling, "I'm about to vaporize something." Her expression remained calm, but the 7 points of light on the console pulsed faster, as if they were syncing with her heartbeat, or perhaps the most dangerous strobe party in the world. What's the over-under on whether this is another murder mech, or just an intergalactic Girl Scout looking for donations? Ryan asked, his voice trailing off, as he retreated towards the entrance tunnel towards Thor, whose heavy footsteps sounded like someone had strapped jackhammers to a war god's shoes. Thor's tail was stiff and growled in a low register, sounding more like a lion than a Labrador. "Either it's a tracker-class stalker or a spectral dome," Valley said as she pressed a switch to conjure a secondary barrier above the iris entrance. The dome shimmered like oil over glass. "The machine isn't exactly alive, either," Ryan moaned. "So zombie robot bounty hunter got it classic Tuesday." Suddenly, the entire room flexed as if poked by a thunder god. A shape above the dome flickered into view, and at first glance, it resembled a centaur, an engineer, with an obsession with knives, with an abnormal number of limbs, a face that looked like a cracked mirror, and a red orb in its place. The creature's claws dragged across the dome, making a screech sound like a dentist threatening your soul. The dome started to crack beneath its weight. Ryan asked if his friends would be arriving early. I backed up and accelerated the signal. VRA said they will breach the atmosphere in 20 minutes. How cool is that? Just in time for Ryan to die creatively. Thor barked once, then ran frantically towards a console and started pawing at it. Ryan blinked, confused. Valor paused, watching, recognizing the resonance frequency of the gate. He was trying to activate the auxiliary defense grid. Ryan frowned, wondering when he could do that, especially since I spilt blood on his fur. She said it was Ryan was taken aback by the transformation of his dog into a security system. Valor shrugged and claimed to be a liar, claiming that Thor could not even refuse to eat used tissues. Thor let out a triumphant bark as 4 orbs arose from the floor, locked into a defensive rotation around the relay's core. Their hummed energy emanated from outside the dome. The stalker paused, roared, and dove all 4 blade limbs into the air. The orbs unleashed crimson beams, which penetrated the creature's exterior shell, but Ryan continued to face the threat. Ripped a metal rod from a wall bracket, possibly for ceremonial purposes, perhaps even sacred, and held it aloft. If anyone is keeping score, I'd like it recorded. I'm about to hit a space demon with alien rebar. Velra touched her staff to the dome, and I'm opening it. What we need to do is draw it inside the defenses. That's a terrible plan. It's like inviting a shark into your bathtub. It will follow you. She said simply that it wants the core and me. Ryan muttered, I should have gone to dental school. The dome flickered, cracked open with a hiss, and the stalker jumped in like a trampoline. The creature pounced on Valeria, despite the orb's repeated firing at point-blank range, slicing through her armor. Ryan acted instinctively, swinging the rod with all his might, but it ricocheted off the stalker's flank like a spoon off a tank. Okay, he gasped, stumbling back. I regret nothing and everything at the same time. The monster swung an arm around and lunged at him, causing Thor to jump, scream, and bite down on the limb. The stalker let out a piercing scream, sending Valeria tumbling to the floor. In an instant, the pulse was on the symbols flared white, and the air thickened as if gravity had seized up. The relay itself appeared to breathe, and the monster started to unfurl its limbs, twisting them in on themselves. Its orb pulsed red, blue, and finally black, and a void appeared in its chest, not a hole, but rather an absence, as if something had accidentally deleted a chunk of reality and forgotten to fix the mistake. As the stalker disappeared, the room fell into silence. The elevator music had finally ceased, and Ryan had collapsed onto some old cushions, panting heavily. Thor licked his face in a proud soldier's manner, and the Valir knelt beside the relay, her hands quivering slightly. Ryan wheezed, wondering if the next installment would also include exploding limbs and razor smiles, or if it was the deluxe version. She glanced at him and he moaned, before flopping back onto the cushions. Next time, a gentle murmur resounded throughout the room as the relay core pulsed a hologram that seemed vaguely humanoid. The hologram's voice reverberated as the extraction ship prepared to enter low orbit and engage in beacon convergence. Visra rose to her feet. Ryan, still gasping for air, sat up and listened. "You don't have to come," she said. "But if you do, they will find you again and destroy your world in an effort to erase everything you've witnessed." Ryan stared at Thor, who wagged his tail as if this were the happiest day of his life, before turning his gaze to the ceiling of the relay. As they entered the convergence beam, Ryan had a revelation. First teleportation was nothing like the movies had portrayed it. Instead of a graceful shimmering and smooth fade-out, it felt more like being engulfed by a blender of starlight and regret. Second, he had completely forgotten to lock his car. The alien stars glowed faintly through the cracks of reality. "Well," he confessed, "my lease is already ruined. I've got like 3 pairs of clean socks, and honestly, I've always wanted to see space." Valra blinked in surprise before smiling. The civic, surrounded by confused raccoons, was likely a heap of ruins at this point, but Ryan had more pressing concerns, such as the fact that he found himself inside a cathedral that seemed to have been constructed by intelligent geometry. The walls curled in inconceivable directions, the air had a faint cinnamon and ozone flavor, and high above gigantic crystal structures revolved on gravitational axes, making Ryan's inner ear beg for retirement. Thor, unfazed as ever, trotted ahead down a transparent ramp, and he promptly started sniffing what appeared to be the ship hummed, not in an engine-roaring kind of way, more like a planetary heartbeat, steady and resonant. The architecture responded, shifting around her presence like it recognized her command, which it probably did. Ryan thought she was the queen. The butler jellyfish led them down a corridor that seemed to elongate based on their speed. Ryan tried walking faster. The hovering jellyfish, dressed as a butler, made a polite dinging sound and floated backwards, as if it had trained in etiquette. Valera stepped onto Addis and extended her staff. They entered a chamber resembling the inside of a stadium-sized timepiece. Thousands of orbs floated mid-air, each displaying shifting visuals of planets, stars, fleets, and formations. One of the orbs, labeled Earth, in sleek alien script, showed North America. Valor muttered, "Oh, good a ship with a sense of humor." The spaceship adapted to keep threats contained in localized folds, creating a living maze-like environment. Super cool, but definitely not nightmare fuel. Ryan pointed to something and asked, "Is that like a space fire alarm for my house?" Valley looked into it and said, "No, it's a bounty marker. You've been tagged." Ryan blinked. Valley explained that tagging is how the syndicate tracks priority targets. She swiped her hand through the air to get more data, and it meant that they now believed you to be valuable. Ryan looked at Thor, who sneezed on a control panel. Thor sneezed again, this time triggering a Project Hemlock's blueprints started to appear on the screen. Valera tensed up her hand, hovering near her staff. Ryan leant in for a closer look. "That sounds friendly," he said, "but it's actually the weapon they used to destroy the Androsian throne fleet. It's also how they ended my rule. The device is a planetary nullifier, and it eats stars like sugar cubes." Ryan whistled to indicate that he thought it was a good idea to speculate that they were building a new, larger one with more evil upgrades, like laser tentacles. Valera said that the device was already complete and was being sent to Earth. After a brief pause, Ryan coughed. "All right, I understand that I mentioned wanting to see space, but I didn't mean a planet-exploding kind of sightseeing. The Syndicate doesn't just erase threats. They erase memories of threats as well. If they destroy Hemlock, not only will Earth burn, but it will also be forgotten." Ryan sat heavily on a floating bench, which is definitely an unusual way to cancel a party. Suddenly a second hologram appeared, this time with a face that wasn't quite human. It had symmetrical, beautiful, cold, golden skin, mechanical eyes, and lips that didn't quite move in sync with the words. "Valera, you persist in interfering with what has already happened. A primitive ape with a pet, how far you've fallen." Khan smirked at Ryan before continuing, "You're late, Khan. I expected your threats weeks ago. You no longer have allies. I have one." Velra stared at the projection with a calm fury that made Ryan want to file a restraining order. Ryan stood up and said, "Hey, I'll have you know that I graduated from community college with a solid 2.9 GPA and once beat a guy in laser tag named Laserfist69. I am not primitive," didn't respond, and then he just disappeared. Ryan breathed a sigh of relief. He's going to be a recurring problem, isn't he? It would round out the bucket list. I turned to face him as the ship was about to warp, but we can't outrun them indefinitely. The only way to stop this is to destroy Hemlock. Ryan rubbed his eyes, and I assume that's not just a matter of pressing a button, thus no more space bomb situation, smiled grimly. The core had to be dismantled manually, and it was alive, according to Ryan. He tilted his head as if he were a sentient AI, or he was actually a pulsating, dreaming being. Whatever it was an echo mind, the stitched consciousness of a dying star, and it was insane and imprisoned. Thor barked once Ryan nodded, and they proceeded to reason with the vengeful star ghost. But before they did, they stopped for snacks. I refused to negotiate with stellar horror on an empty stomach. They arrived at the command bridge, which looked like a planetarium held together by crystal threads. Velra stepped into a cradle at the foot of the bridge. Center shut her eyes and started muttering orders in that peculiar language that gave Ryan a run for his money whenever he listened intently. As the ship sped ahead, stars bent and time hiccuped, a vending machine beeped. Ryan reached for what seemed like a glowing granola bar and gave it to Thor, who looked like he was eating sentient jerky. The ship entered warp, and the stars ahead turned red. The first thing Ryan noticed upon stepping out of warp was a heavy cosmic hush. A menacing hemlock hung precariously in the gravitational cradle of a dying star. Instead of a weapon, it resembled an inconceivably elaborate cathedral, its twisted black stone and glowing circuitry forming an impossible architecture that spun like a gyroscope. Tendrils of solar plasma kissed its hull, feeding it. Ryan squinted, wondering if the thing was humming or singing to itself. Valera spoke in a tight voice, explaining that the structure remembered every world it had erased. Ryan took a step forward, feeling a surge of unease. As we drew nearer to the viewport, a frown spread across my face. Is it strange that I feel like it's judging me? It's actually the Echo Mind's defense mechanism. Ryan winced, and I felt bad about putting off my taxes until 2022. Thor whimpered and pawed at the floor, and Ryan bent down to scratch him behind the ears. If you ever feel like your own tail is yelling at you, remind yourself that it's not real. The ship slid forward on silent thrusters, evading Hemlock's outer sensors, and landing on one of the inner spires with an entry hatch. Valera strode steadily ahead, her long ears quivering ever so slightly, her staff humming low. Ryan trailed behind Thor, both of them observing shadows that didn't seem to belong anywhere. Halfway to the core chamber, they passed a wall adorned with faces, not sculptures, not projections, but something else entirely. The corridor twisting around them with each step was clearly not meant to be walked, but rather feared. Actual preserved impressions of people who attempted to reach the core before Ryan stared at one that appeared suspiciously like a mouth thing. He decided he wouldn't eat broccoli for a week after hearing that the core was alive. Ryan whispered, "Is it like a person, or more like a cosmic mood swing?" Valera explained that it was once a star, but is now a soul trapped in machinery. It is furious because it was used to kill as it was promised peace, but instead got war. The last door that opened inside was no control panels, no blinking lights, no massive glowing red buttons that said, "Press me to stop death." VT. Instead, the room took the shape of an amphitheater, and in the middle swam a pulsating blue-white mass of energy like a heartbeat wrapped in lightning. Ryan blinked, satisfied that OSHA wasn't going to comply. As they approached, a voice echoed through the chamber asking, "Why have you come?" It wasn't a question, but rather a reckoning. Vira stepped forward to end the cycle, and I was taken aback. She said, "But I'm not anymore." Ryan felt a surge of guilt as he recalled a memory of his childhood dog running away, as well as an incident when he lied to his grandma about going to the gym. The emotional guilt buffet continued, and he realized he needed a plan, not just anger. His mind kept telling him, "You are frail and mortal, insignificant, and yet here I am arguing with a stellar ghost." Ryan countered, "Maybe I'm a little more significant than you think." Visa looked at him startled, but the echo in his heart told him that he was right. The core underwent a transformation, becoming less jagged. Curiosity piqued. Ryan cautiously advanced. "You don't want to be used as a tool, do you?" Velra said, her voice trailing off, as she lowered her staff and drove it into the platform, sending shockwaves through the air. The words, "old codes, queen's blood," "ancient authority," "grief," and "release" echoed through the room. The core started to collapse, not in a destructive way, but as if it were folding into itself, and the light faded. As the power drained from the structure, Ryan asked, "Is there a way out of this?" Velra smiled and said, "Hold on to me." As the platform collapsed, they rematerialized on the Queen's ship far away from Hemlock. The display showed the weapon folding in on itself, its energy leaking back into the star it had been stolen from. A gentle chime confirmed the shutdown, and there were no explosions. Ryan left the observation room in a state of stunned silence. Thor leapt into his lap and promptly drooled all over his shirt. Unconcerned about the cosmic energy-charged fur, Ryan scratched his ears. Vavra sat beside him and said, "It's done." Ryan nodded, and she looked out the window at the stars. "Now we must rebuild, but our people are scattered, and the galaxy is fractured. Fortunately, there is hope." Ryan glanced around again. "Will I be a part of the rebuilding, or am I just going to be left behind with a T-shirt that reads, 'I survived the Star Wars, and all I got was this lousy shirt'? Witnessed more than most mortals could ever imagine. You faced monsters and madness. You have the choice to go home, or stay, and help us find a better way." Ryan leant back, contemplating his previous life, unemployed, aimless, with a fridge that made strange humming noises and condiments that had expired in 2019. He glanced at Thor, wondering if they had snacks. Viral smiled endlessly, and Thor barked once, as if to seal the deal. In the distance, the stars started to sing once more. In the woods, my dog discovered a wounded extraterrestrial vampire woman who was the queen of a galaxy. Just as Ryan was clinging to the leash, Thor barked at a squirrel with the zeal of a lumberjack on a caffeine high. Suddenly, the dog leapt into the underbrush, as if he had suddenly remembered that he had left the oven on in 1987. "Thor, you terrible betrayer! You have 4 legs!" Ryan swooped into the forest behind him, crashing through brambles and nearly tripping over a rock that appeared suspiciously like it had been judging. Since the Jurassic period, he had wanted nothing to do with nighttime forest hikes. He thought they were reserved for serial killers, lost tourists, and cryptids with bad decision-making abilities. However, Thor had insisted on going anyway, and Ryan hadn't entirely lost it, but his combination of whining and head-tilting made him feel like the worst pet parent ever. If he had said no, a branch had smacked him on the shin, and he was bleeding profusely. At this point, his entire body was likely just one big O. Finally, Thor let out a bark, but it wasn't his usual bark. As he pursued the squirrels or neighborhood raccoons, Ryan heard a sharp, frantic bark, as if he had cornered something he didn't fully understand, or perhaps something was cornering him. Ryan froze, his breath coming in hot clouds. The forest felt thicker, as if the trees were leaning into eavesdropping. He followed the sound, pushing past a curtain of moss, half expecting to find a bear, or worse, a naked yoga cult. Instead, he discovered Thor standing motionless next to a crumpled figure under a tangle of cedar roots. The woman appeared to be a tall, sturdy woman, Her hood was partially pulled down, exposing silver hair that curled like smoke. Her skin was too pale, her features too sharp, and her ears, which were long and graceful, stood like crescent blades. Ryan opened his mouth to say something heroic, or helpful, or maybe just coherent. The woman, who seemed impossibly still, wore tattered black fabric that shimmered under the moonlight, like silk soaked in oil. Her eyes, which were silver reflective and looked more like two tiny galaxies tucked into her skull, were opened. She spoke softly, but with a strong undertone. Hi, did you fall? Are you okay? I'm dying." Ryan blinked, thinking, "Okay, that's direct. Most people start with, 'I need help,' or 'call an ambulance.' But sure, let's start big." She attempted to move, but Thor writhed and nudged her arm with his snout, so she murmured and reached out to stroke his fur, her fingers trembling. Thor could feel me even through the field animals. Ryan crouched beside her, still not sure if he was experiencing a dream, a hallucination, or a very real nightmare. "I don't know who you are, lady, but you're bleeding a lot. This is Oregon, so the ER is like 15 minutes away. I am Valera." She interrupted, pushing herself up with surprising speed, and he stared at her ears, blood-metallic scent, and strange static tingling in his fingertips. This wasn't a wild forest hermit or a cosplay, but something else entirely. There was a moment of silence as Ryan broke the